Chapter 1, Section 2, making bar graphs. So yesterday we looked at bar graphs. Now kind of like how do you go through and make them. So I tried coming up with kind of some hints that I think will make it go better over here on the left-hand side. But first of all, the numbers on a bar graph, so the numbers that end up being along here, basically tell you if you have a bar that goes to a certain height, you can look at, well, if the bar goes to here, what's the number? So the numbers on the axis, what should they look like? First of all, they should be evenly spaced. So numbers on axis should be evenly spaced. And I would encourage you to, as you try to figure out what those numbers should be, start by figuring out what the highest number is. So start by finding what number needs to be at the top of the scale. At the top of the scale. And I would recommend not necessarily going with that top number, but go with a number that can be kind of easily divisible by something. So I'm trying to kind of count as I talk, 2, 4, 6, 7. So I think we have 8 guys in here and 7 girls in here. If they were both 7 and 7, I wouldn't write this, but if they were both 7 and 7, so don't write this. I could put a 7 there, but then it gets really kind of hard to say, well, where should 1 be? Maybe 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then like, okay, so 6. It's not evenly spaced anymore, right? So I'd recommend, this is how I do it, and I found really it works pretty well. I'm going to say let's go up to 8. So I'm going to put it, so this I would write. So put an 8 at the top. You could put a 0 at the bottom. Do you agree you could pretty easily eyeball halfway from 0 to 8?
Yeah.
So I'm going to put a line at that halfway mark. What number should go by that line? 4.
What?
And do you agree you could cut that top half and the bottom half in half again? And now each of those little hashes are going to be 2 and 6. And you could write in those numbers if you wanted to. Oh, don't put the 6 there. That would be wrong. But, you could put those numbers in, right? And if you wanted to, you could put in a mark for 1 and for 3. So it's up to you. You don't have to necessarily put in all those other marks. You definitely don't have to write in all the numbers. But you see how it's a whole lot easier to get a nice even-looking space if you start with like an 8? Or you could even do like a 10, because half of 10 is 5. And I found I'm pretty good with some practice at doing, if I have a 5, doing the 1, 2, 3, 4 in the middle. But do something like that. Okay, so we have 8 guys in the room. So for them, up above where it says guys, we want to put in a bar, and it should go up to the number 8, agreed? So you have something like that. If you want to fill it in for bonus points.
Bonus point.
You have that there. In girls, if I counted right, we have 7 of you. So for them, I'm kind of doing this in my head. I wouldn't actually write this in, but I'm saying, okay, 7 was that high, so I want my girls' graph to go up to that height, the bar to go up to that height. And I'll actually erase those little hash marks. Those are just kind of making my graph look less pretty. And then fill it in if you want to, but you at least have the bar. But fair enough for bar graphs, for those types of things there. And that's really a lot of the focus of today. Oops, I didn't fill in the line up above. So pick a number greater than the maximum.
Oops.
That's easy to, I probably wrote divide up. Yep, divide up.
If you pick a number that's greater than the maximum, then 8 won't work since you have 8 guys in here.
Greater or equal to. Greater than or equal to. Good call. So greater than or equal to. So at least as big as the number. So if you had like a 9, I'd go up to a 10. If you had a 45, I'd probably round up to 50. Because 45 is pretty big. Jumping up to 50 isn't that huge. If you had a 90, I suppose you could break it into thirds and do like 30, 60, 90. Or you could just go up to 100. But pick a number that's going to be easy to divide up. There's always some people, and some people are actually pretty good at it, and you could try that if you want to, but I'd encourage you not to be people that do the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then especially on a quiz, usually on a quiz or test, I'll give you the X and Y axis, and so people that then take their pencil and do this up at the top and, add on, or their whole graph is just in this very little bottom part, those are the ones that get marked down some. Feel like you know enough to move on? So the second thing is we're going to do similar, but we're looking at double bar graphs. Double bar graphs compares two sets of related data. So before we did like guys and girls in class, maybe we'd go through and say like, you could divide it up into guys that like sports and guys that don't like sports, and girls that like sports and girls that don't like sports, or something like that. People that are in band and people that aren't in band by gender. But we're going to jump down to this here. So my original thought was have you work with people. Should we maybe just do it together? Okay, you're welcome to kind of ignore me and try to jump out ahead. But we're going to go through, we're going to do a double bar graph with this information here. And this would maybe be on the right something that you'd get on a quiz. So on a quiz you might get something like this, probably without the 1960, 1960. What's that? Irrigated is the amount of land that is watered, essentially. So lawns, farmers' fields, that type of stuff. So if we have a 1960, next to 1960 we're going to have
X-axis.
1970, then a 1980, and a 1990. So I'd try to kind of somewhat evenly space those out. There's 4 years that should go along the bottom. Good? So we have that. Now we want to say, well, what does our highest number have to be? Go for it. You can just say it out loud.
30.
30, yep. So if I'm looking, they're all under 30. This one here is pretty close, but 30 is a little bit bigger than all the numbers, and we could break up 30, right? Now this is in millions, so I'm just going to put a 30 in as opposed to trying to write out like 30. And in a perfect world, we'd write out the title, Irrigated Land in Millions of Acres or something, but I'm going to just leave that off. Can I get away with that? Be okay? But it'd be better if I had it in there. I'm going to put 0 down here at the bottom. 30, now you could do it a couple ways. You could break it in half and say this is going to be 15, and there's nothing wrong with that. Since 30 is divisible by 3, I'm tempted to say if we do something like that and that, is that a pretty convincing thirds? Think we could do that? So I'm maybe going to do that, and then we'll have like 10 million and 20 million. And if you wanted to, you could put in hash marks for like the 5 and 15 and 25. You could do some of that if you wanted to. Okay. Now in 1960, I should pause and unpause. So in 1960, we have these two numbers there. So we want to have two bars. One of them is going to be about 27.1. One of them is going to be 28.7. Fair enough? But we need to have a way to distinguish which one's India and which one's United States. I can easily do colors, but you could fill them in different ways. You could have one be like filled in completely and one just be blank on the inside. You could do one with polka dots and one with stripes. You could kind of do whatever you wanted to. But I'm maybe going to say, I'm going to go with red and green. So I'm going to, over here, I'm going to put like a little red and say this is India. But if you want red or India maybe to be the one that has the stripes through it, maybe I'll do one that's different color and stripes. So this is going to be the U.S. And
can I put that at the bottom?
You could put it at the bottom. I'm seeing where mine could have, my bars maybe are going to hit this. I think I'm going to be okay. I think it's going to come just underneath the U.S., but it's kind of out of space on my drawing. But at the bottom's okay, just somewhere kind of out of the way. Okay, so the 1960, our first column, should we do India first? So India, I need to have mine be in red. I need to go up to 27. So if I have my 25 being right about here, so 27, you agree it's going to be a little bit higher, something like this. So right about there is my 27. So I'm going to have this be my bar for India in 1960. Quasi-fill that in. And next to it, we want to have the United States. So United States, we have our 25. India's at 27. We need to go up almost to 29. So it's going to be just a little bit below the 30. And a lot of times for these double bar graphs, they'll have the two bars that are kind of for that same time frame kind of touching each other. If you want to put a small space between the two, that's totally fine also. It's up to you. Something like that for your second bar. You at least want to have a larger space between like the two different years here and here than what you have between the things with the same year. We good for that?
Almost.
And I'll maybe then blaze ahead. So next thing, 1970, India is going to be 20.9, which is pretty much at the 21. So I'm going to go just a little bit above the 20 and put in my bar here for India. It's kind of right about where 20.9 or 21 would be. And my next one for the United States is 29.6, so we're pretty much right up to that 30. Sometimes what I'll do too, I know this one right here, and I wouldn't write this in, but that's supposed to be 28.7, and right above it is 30. So I'll try to aim to be just a smidgen between those two, so kind of base it off of that. So if I connect that in there. So I'll do something like that. Get rid of the writing. So kind of use the scale, but kind of use the ones you already drew in to do the similar. Should we do the last bit, or are you guys feeling like we got it?
I'm still working.
At least do 1980. If I get a little ahead of you too, you can, yeah. It's probably better to practice it on your own than to scribble it all down here. But 18.1, so 1980, I'm going to be over here somewhere. Need to go up to the 18, so that's kind of passing 15. 18's maybe about that high. So I have India in 1980. United States ends 26.1, so just a bit above the 25. Then you could do the last ones for 1990 also. So 1990, we have the 16.7, so a little above the 15, maybe a little higher than that. 22.4. Oh. Any questions? If you get what you're doing and you don't get all that finished, I'm okay with that. But let's hit this last part down here before we end for good. So what scale and interval would you use for these data sets? So I'm really just trying to say if we were to, and I don't think I'd write this in, but if you wanted to, I suppose we could. We'd quick draw in a scale thing. If we're going to start at 0, what should we go up to for this thing? I see a couple things I could be a believer in. Go for it.
100.
You could do 100, or you could do 80, because the 80 is kind of a nice number too. I'd probably stick with the 80, but I think the 100 would be very believable. I wouldn't look at it and be like, oh, I have to mark you down. But I think I'm going to go for the 80. And then for the interval, well, if we have the 80, we could say right in the middle is 40. Then you could break those in half again and get 20 and 60. And then if you wanted to, you could put in a hash marks at 10 and 30 and 50 and so on. But something like that. We good? So I'd do something that looks kind of believable like that. And then if we jump over to number 2, if we start at 0, what do you think we should go up to? Yeah, go for it, Taylor. Go for it.
4,700.
You could, but if you put a 4,700 up here, it's going to be real hard to break it up. So I'd probably jump instead to...
I'd go to 5,000.
Yeah, I think 5,000 is pretty believable. With the 5, some people, they start at the bottom and they do like the 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 and see where they end up. You could always erase it if you're wrong. I often will put the 5,000 at the top and then just try to eyeball it. So I'm going to say 1, 2, 3. And you can fudge a little bit when you get there, kind of put 4,000 in the middle. So that's not perfect. I started out a little bit high at the beginning. But But I'd probably do something like that, up to 5,000 and break it up by thousands. Does that work for people for number 2? Then we go down to 3 and 4, and then we're done. So 3. I'm going to take 3 and go from 0 to, who hasn't answered yet? I think I got both of you guys. Anyone else have a thought? Go for it.
15.
Nice. That's what I do. Other people agree? I suppose if you don't like breaking up 15, 15 is where I'd then break it up into thirds. Yep. And then I'd have my 5 and my 10. Some people maybe would do 16, then you could cut 16 in half and get 8. Cut it in half again, you get 4. Oh, really? All right, this very last one. Draw in my chart. And largest number's 200. And all of these are pretty high. We'll talk about broken axes later, but you could go 0 to 200 and break it up by like 50s or something like that. That's one way to do it. Eventually we'll talk about broken axes, which would be where you would do something like this and say 0, and then maybe do like 50 or 150 to 200. And then you could take and put in your other numbers from there. But for now, we'll just stick with this first one. I just got a little bit, probably overly excited. That's it for this section.